All right, Pancake, back before I ended up in the hospital a little bit ago, as I recall, you had a question for me.
Yes, Yeti, is the Earth flat?
Right, and I said that we would need to dedicate a full-length video to that.
Yeah.
But before we move on, viewers might be wondering, why does your voice sound a little different than it did in our first clip?
Okay, well, at the time whenever we were recording that, I had a cold, so my voice sounded a bit different.
All right, so that covers that. I think that's all of our bases covered. On to the opening graphics. So the other day, you asked if Earth was flat, and I just said no, and jumped to credits. It was a joke, jokingly dismissing it as though it wasn't even something to discuss. It shouldn't be a discussion. There shouldn't be anything to discuss. But unfortunately, in today's world, where everybody wants to be able to choose their own reality, much like a kid choosing their own adventure in those old kids' adventure books, there are people that chose a different reality, and that reality conflicts with everybody else's reality. The ancient Greeks started wrapping their head around the notion that maybe the Earth is round as far back as the 5th century BCE. Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BCE, came to the conclusion that the Earth was round not because he wanted it to be or needed it to be, but because observations told him so. His early observations that still hold up just fine today include noticing that ships disappear over the horizon, that totally different constellations are visible in different parts of the world, and that the Earth casts a round shadow against the moon during a lunar eclipse. Around 240 BCE, Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with surprising accuracy for that time.
So, Yeti, if we've known Earth was round for over 2,000 years, why would anyone believe Earth is flat?
Well, truth be told, the key word there is believe. You see, those great minds that came to the conclusion that Earth was round over 2,000 years ago did so based on observations they had made. They observed something and then reached a conclusion based on those observations. Now, this is the exact opposite of what flat earthers do, where they reach a conclusion, then try to find evidence supporting it. But why come to that conclusion in the first place? Why start from there? The simple answer to that is religion. Now, I don't know if every single flat earther in the entire world is religious, and it seems like there's probably gotta be at least a few that aren't, but I have never heard of or encountered one yet. Besides the stubborn insistence that Earth is flat, something else that all of them have in common seems to be religion.
Why does religion make Earth flat?
The blame doesn't rest on the shoulder of all religions, but rather certain specific ones. Specifically, we're looking at Judeo-Christianity. Even though some really brilliant minds started figuring out that the Earth was round over 2,000 years ago, the earliest Old Testament scriptures date back about 1,400 years roughly before that. So back then, nobody on Earth had any idea that the Earth was anything other than flat. So you might be wondering, why would anybody today be influenced on the beliefs of people from 1,400 years BCE? Well, the religions based on those scriptures rely on belief in everything written in those scriptures, and the people that wrote those early scriptures wrote them with the understanding that the Earth was flat. So that is how it's described in the early scriptures. Now, in modern times, most religious persons accept and believe that the Earth is round, and this doesn't conflict with their faith for them. But for some reason, a limited percentage of these religious persons insist on sticking with the description of the Earth as it was written in those early scriptures.
So they're being ignorant?
Yes, unfortunately, and this is why there's no real point in trying to convince flat earthers that they might be mistaken. So many YouTube channels and websites and just well-intended Facebook and social media posts try to logic and reason with flat earthers, perhaps maybe in the hopes that we'll find the correct magical argument that can persuade them. But there's no point in all that, because the fact of the matter is that there isn't any persuading them. Now, we'll go ahead and make the side note that maybe, perhaps, there is a very small percentage of them that might be reasonable enough that you could potentially reason with them. I guess I'm just generalizing here. When you're having a debate with somebody, at some point you should be able to stop and say, all right, what's it going to take to convince you? And there should be some kind of an answer. Something should be able to convince them. If their position is that there is literally nothing on earth that could convince them, then you're just wasting your time. Go ahead and stop right there, cut your losses, walk away. But there is no arguing and reasoning with flat earthers. There's no convincing them, and I'm not going to bother trying. This isn't for their sake, it's for the sake and sanity of anybody else. Now, I've seen and heard them act as though us globeheads are threatened whenever they start questioning our dogma of the round global Earth. Not only is that simply not the case, nothing could be farther from the truth. Questioning it is how we test and verify what we think we know. Every time that they pose questions challenging the round Earth, and the round Earth model still holds up, that just verifies that what we think we know seems to be the truth. To date, they have thus far failed to pose any question that could not be answered by science. And thus far, they have yet to present any unassailable argument towards a flat Earth. They act like, pretend that they pose questions that we have not been able to answer, and yet we have always answered their questions. They just don't simply like those answers. Because they don't like those answers, because they're inconvenient, they ignore them, sweep them under the rug, and pretend they're not there. Gravity serves as an excellent example of this. Gravity is inconvenient, so they don't like gravity.
How is gravity inconvenient?
Because gravity answers questions they don't like science being able to answer. For example, they don't understand how water stays on a round Earth without falling off. Never mind the fact that they can't explain what exactly that force is that would pull water down below the ball Earth in their memes. Water stays on Earth because of gravity. That's inconvenient, so obviously gravity can't be real. They also wonder what keeps our atmosphere close to the Earth instead of bleeding off into the vacuum of space if Earth isn't under a big magical dome. Well, gravity to the rescue, as gravity pulls the atmosphere to the Earth. Well, that's inconvenient, so gravity must not be real.
That's ridiculous. How do they explain stuff falling?
Oh, it's as simple as Earth is constantly accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second squared. It's been doing this at every moment of existence, of course. So here's something funny about that. You see, they have memes about how the Earth spinning at 1,000 miles an hour is ridiculous. According to their logic and reasoning, our faces should be peeling off. But they're okay with an Earth that's been constantly accelerating every moment of every day since the beginning of Earth. So how fast is that, you might wonder? Well, that's an answer that's constantly changing. Plus, you need to know how long exactly that is. Flat earthers, being religious and strictly sticking to literal translation of the scriptures, should believe the Earth is roughly 6,000 years old. That will give us much less insane Earth speed than if we calculate for billions of years. Even so, just using a generic flat figure of 6,000 years, that puts Earth at insane speeds. I'm not a mathematician, so I once used an acceleration calculator to come up with numbers for me. If they're inaccurate, forgive me, it's the calculator's fault. But even if the numbers aren't technically mathematically quite right, the principle should still stand up. But what I got for just one day is 1,894,059 miles per hour. Now at the end of day 2, we're moving upwards at 3,788,117 miles an hour. After day 3 of Earth's existence, we're rising upwards at 5,682,177 miles per hour. At the end of the first year, Earth is rising upwards at, 16,591,956,840 miles per hour. Even if that math isn't perfect, you get the point. That insane speed is just in 1 year. Imagine what that would be after 6,000 years of that. Flat earthers are fine with that though, but Earth rotating at 1,000 miles an hour is too ridiculous to believe. Of course, being relentlessly stubborn and quick to excuses, I have absolutely no doubt that they would at least try to argue with that. Maybe they'll try to argue that every so often God resets everything. Okay, when does this happen? Why doesn't anybody notice that every falling object in the entire world suddenly resets to 0 and starts all over again? Maybe to that they could try to argue that it happens at a moment when nothing on Earth is falling. Well, there's no such thing. There's always something falling somewhere in the world at any given time. Eventually, you're just blatantly accepting magic as the answer. If you want to believe in magic, that's your right. But just don't try to argue with anyone, especially pretending to be scientific, practical, or logical about it. Don't expect others to accept magic as an answer. Still, we can disprove the argument that things seem to fall because Earth is moving upwards. We're not obligated to disprove it, but we can. You see, there's only one Earth. It would all be accelerating upwards together at the same rate. That means that the apparent speed of all falling objects everywhere in the world all at once should appear to be about the same because Earth is accelerating upwards towards them all at the same time. Granted, you can get into wind resistances and whatnot, but for efficiency, we'll just look at similar objects, like say 2 baseballs falling together. Drop a baseball, and exactly 1 second later drop another baseball just like it. A second after that, measure both of their speeds. The baseball dropped first would be traveling faster, even though both baseballs are essentially identical and Earth is rising upwards allegedly to them at the same time. Now, how is Earth rising faster for one than it is for the other at the exact same time? Alternatively, drop a ball from 20 feet up. When it reaches 10 feet, drop a second ball from 10 feet up. The ball that was dropped first will hit the ground first, even though for one instant they were both at 10 feet. It's a shame we have to spend so much time not discussing flat Earth directly, but this is a consequence of the deliberate, willful ignorance that we're dealing with. Everything gets explained away with excuses, but those excuses don't hold up to the slightest hint of scrutiny. Further, the excuses don't even all fit together. They're like a junk drawer of excuses that you pull out for a moment and then shove back into the drawer of parts that don't fit together. To date, they have yet to put together a comprehensive model of Earth that fits together with everything. Even if you can get it to kind of work for one thing, there's at least 3 more things that don't fit that model at all. There really is no excusing that today. People were figuring this stuff out centuries ago without today's modern technologies and conveniences. So, as an example, they have Antarctica spread out as an ice wall all around the disk Earth. Okay, cool. As long as you don't think about it. It's common knowledge that in the Arctic Circle you can have 24-hour days in which the sun never sets completely from your view. Flat earthers even acknowledge this. However, unfortunately for them, the same thing happens at the South Pole, which doesn't work on their flat disk models. There's no flat Earth model that they have and no excuse that they can present to explain a 24-hour sun visible in Antarctica. Since they just run with gut reactions and excuses, obviously this means that there cannot be a 24-hour sun visible in Antarctica. According to them, people that claim to have been to Antarctica and observed the 24-hour sun are liars. They insist that you can't even go to Antarctica. Admittedly, it's not easy and it's not a cheap trip, but it is possible. It's difficult to get permission to go there for multiple reasons, including our own safety and preservation of the Antarctic environment. To disprove flat earthers, several globe heads went on a trip to Antarctica for what was known as the final experiment. Now, please understand that multiple flat earthers were invited to attend. In fact, they were offered all expenses paid trips, so the trip would have been free for them. Almost all of the flat earthers invited lacked the character and fortitude to attend, though a few did. They went all the way to the bottom of the world, to a deadly frigid hellscape, to prove that 1, yes, you can go there, and 2, yes, you can observe a 24-hour sun. That disproves every model of a flat Earth that anyone has ever seen.
So, did they accept the evidence?
Nope. They almost universally refused to go and made up silly excuses for not going, like us, you and I, being demons, because they lacked the courage and integrity to face the truth. They then started making up excuses immediately because they absolutely refused to accept the truth. Okay, fine, if you don't want to go hang out with us demons, go on your own trip, funded by yourselves. That way you can ensure that there ain't no trickery involved. Just make sure not to cheat and go at a time of the year when we know that you can't see the sun for 24 hours. They won't do it, of course, because they refuse the possibility of coming face to face with a truth that they don't like. They have absolutely no interest in the truth. They only want to be right at any or all cost. Every once in a while, you'll find a flat earther that's going to try to be scientific and smart about it, come up with an interesting experiment, trying to prove definitively, for themselves at least, whether Earth is flat or round. And you get your hopes up right up to the point where they reject the results because it wasn't what they wanted. As an example, there was a time that they got a bunch of money together, I think it was like $15,000, and got a really expensive fancy gyroscope to prove that the Earth isn't rotating. But what they got from their fancy expensive gyroscope was what they described as 15 degrees of drift per hour. Now, some quick math will tell you that 15 degrees per hour times 24 hours in a day is 360 degrees per day. Whoops, they accidentally proved the Earth is a rotating ball. Well, that wasn't the result that they wanted, so they rejected it as some kind of an error. You don't get to do that. That's not how science works. You can't just reject answers you don't like. Now, maybe the flat Earth community might want to try to argue that we aren't open to the possibility of a round Earth, that we reject anything that contradicts a round Earth. But we just don't really care what shape the Earth is, whether it's flat, or if it's round, or square, or a dodecahedron, or a giant Mario. If you want to make the argument that we're wrong and that it is some other shape, we're open to that. Go ahead and show us the evidence, but it has to be compelling evidence that holds up to scrutiny. We cling to the round ball because all the evidence that we've ever seen supports that it's a round ball, and there is absolutely no evidence of any kind that supports a flat Earth. Now, the flat Earth memes and arguments tend to be based on a lack of understanding, which even holds true for the best argument that they can come up with, which is basically, well, it looks flat to me. But even this is again an issue of a lack of understanding, because while a ball looks round from a distance, the closer you get to it, the less you see of it, the more flat it seems to be. If we were standing at sea level, we'd only see about 0.00014% of the entire Earth's surface. Now, there's no way that I'm going to even attempt to address every single solitary argument that they've made and every single alleged piece of evidence that they've presented. That would be a full-time job. It would be easy to have a channel exclusively just debunking all their bullcrap. But they'll happily, enthusiastically run with anything that even vaguely seems to support their position. For example, we're looking at a photograph of the Chicago skyline as seen across Lake Michigan from, I think, 60 miles away. Now, they love stuff like this because they propose that we shouldn't be able to, on a round Earth, see any of this at all. Now, they are bad with their math and their calculations, which often are based on a viewer looking at something of roughly the same height as them and not being at an elevated perspective or viewing something that is higher up. Now, here in the case of these buildings, we're looking at the tops of tall buildings, which you would be able to observe from much farther away than you would something at ground level. And that's something that they seem to be neglecting with photos like this, because if you look carefully, we're only seeing the tops of the tallest buildings. Everything below that is missing, seemingly underwater. Holy crap, Chicago is a total loss. I just don't remember ever in the news hearing about Chicago being like several hundred feet underwater. I guess everybody thoughts and prayers for Chicago as they try to recover from this biblical flood. Oh wait, never mind. Thank God that's just the curvature of the earth and not Chicago underwater. Now, I'm also not going to spend a tremendous amount of time proving that the earth is round. Once again, we could easily dedicate an entire channel to just nothing but videos doing so. But let's take a look at something really simple that can prove the round earth and simultaneously disprove a flat earth, because this works with one and doesn't make any sense on the other. Simply watch the sunset. On flat earth models, you have a sun that's, depending on who you talk to, I don't know, they don't seem to have a general consensus, hundreds or even a few thousand miles up above the surface. And if that's the case, it never really should ever disappear completely from view. Now, depending on where you are, if there's a lot of mountains or big hills or buildings or whatever around, maybe they could try to pretend that you don't see it because it's being blocked by stuff. But if you're in a wide open area, that doesn't really work. And especially if you're standing on the Pacific beach looking out across several thousand miles of open ocean, there is nothing out there that should obstruct your view of the sun. Flat earthers and round earthers alike can at least agree that the Pacific Ocean is several thousand miles across. And when you wade through all the flat earther memes and arguments and bullcrap, one of the arguments they love to make is that water always finds its level. It can't bulge upward. So how, on a flat earth, can I stand on the beach of the Pacific Ocean looking out across several thousand miles of ocean and see the sun disappear from view seemingly into the water? This sunset makes perfectly good sense on a round earth and makes no sense of any conceivable kind on a flat earth. While we're on that, how exactly does nighttime work on a flat earth? I mean, look at this model, for example. Why does it act like a complete round sphere that glows is shining down in a single direction like a flashlight? I mean, if you had somehow physically created this as a model in your living room or whatever, it wouldn't work this way. Your sun, however you would construct it, would illuminate the entire disk, not just a little area on it. I mean, it might make some sense if the sun had a giant lampshade over it, but last I checked, I don't see a giant lampshade. Because they're stubborn and like BS excuses, one of them that I could imagine them arguing is that the atmosphere is so thick and dense that eventually it filters out the sun and you just can't see it through the atmosphere anymore. Okay, cool. So how's come we never see that happening? We never see the sun as it gets more distant from us, fading away into this dense atmosphere. Now, in fairness, because us round earthers are honest and not dishonest like some other people, I will here and now admit that the sun shining at us indirectly, like through a bunch of the atmosphere, does have some impact on it. You see that during a sunrise or a sunset. That's why the sun looks white when it's directly overhead, and around sunset becomes more yellow and orange. It's still completely visible though, it's just that its apparent color has been distorted by shining through so much atmosphere. But going back to my example of standing on the beach, if it worked the way flat earthers might try to propose it to work, you should be able to watch the sun not completely setting, but slowly lowering and shrinking in the sky as it gets farther away. And if the atmosphere is causing it to eventually become out of view to us, you should see it fade out of view instead of seemingly setting beneath the water. But nowhere on Earth in human history has anybody ever been able to stand and observe the sun fading from view because the atmosphere is filtering it out completely. So I'm going to go ahead right now and make a challenge to all flat earthers. If you want us to take you seriously with your flat earth proposal, get all your ducks in a row, get all your details straight, get a comprehensive model that fits everything we can throw at it. Don't come up with a model that kind of seems to work with some things. I need it to work with everything. Anything that we measure on your map, any two places, the distance between them should line up exactly with what we observe if we travel them in the real world. If you come up with a map and tell me that certain flights that I can take in the real world aren't possible, or if your map has it that a flight from the southern end of South America to the southern end of Africa is 3, 4, 5 times longer than a flight from, say, Brazil to somewhere in northern Africa, go back to the drawing board. Your map doesn't work. You need to come up with a map in which I can observe a 24-hour sun in the Arctic Circle, but also go down to the bottom of the world and observe a 24-hour sun in Antarctica. If those things aren't both possible on your map, then you don't have anything. I need you to come up with a flat earth model on which a sunset makes some kind of sense. And we need to somehow have it so that we can't see the sun at all times, even though, as of right now, it's allegedly 3,000 miles up in the air. I need a lunar eclipse to work on your model. I need you to come up with an alternative to gravity to explain why things fall that doesn't involve an Earth that accelerates upwards at millions and billions of miles an hour. And your gravity explanation has to account for different identical objects with the same wind resistance and mass and everything falling at completely different speeds at the exact same moment in time because they were dropped at different times. I need your model to explain how people 5,000-10,000 miles apart on completely different parts of the Earth can look up at the moon and see the exact same face of the moon no matter where you are in the world. Nobody ever sees it from a different side. In the real world, people have sailed around the entirety of Antarctica, and it wasn't a trip that was several tens of thousands of miles. I need you to make that work on your flat Earth map. Now, this, of course, isn't everything, not even close. This is just enough to get you started. Now, I hope I'm not giving the impression that I'm meaning to attack or personally insult the flat earthers. That wasn't my intention at all, and I don't mean for it to come across that way if it did. Now, I admittedly don't agree with their perspectives and the way that they often approach and treat the subject matter. I definitely have a problem with coming up with the answer first and then trying to find evidence to support it, rather than the other way around, whereby you reach a conclusion based on the evidence that's been presented to you. But I'm not meaning to attack them personally or directly. Now, they do often act like and describe us globeheads as though we are stupid, although, in fairness, they probably also feel just the same that they're often depicted as stupid by us as well. But it is not my intention to do that here. Now, giving due credit here, And admittedly, I don't personally know any flat earthers that I can think of, but from my impressions of them, based on what I have seen and heard of them on their videos and on social media, I think at least some of them are otherwise intelligent people. Nobody's perfect, myself included. Nobody knows everything. Nobody's right all the time. Everybody stumbles and makes a mistake, misunderstands something, forgets something. And Lord knows it's no different for me personally. So if at any point I have given the impression that I am implying or suggesting that they are somehow stupid, I apologize. That was not my intention. But I am just sitting here patiently waiting on a strong, meaningful argument in support of a flat earth.
So, Yeti, do you think they ever will?
I seriously doubt it, but if they ever do, we'll give it a look. But to this date, all the evidence supports that the Earth is round, and absolutely nothing supporting the Earth is flat. So I'm not really going to hold my breath on that, but we'll see.
Okay. Do I start?
Yes, you start.